All right, are we good here? We on and running? Okay, wonderful. Good afternoon. My name is Jack Lloyd, and I am a supervising attorney with Legal Aid's Mortgage Foreclosure Prevention Project. And this is a follow-up to a number of presentations we have done throughout the end of spring and into the beginning of summer, ever since the COVID started. We have continued to receive a lot of questions from folks related to how the CARES Act, how the federal legislation called the CARES Act affects their mortgage situation. And so we're going to revisit a number of issues that we've talked about in the past, but we're also going to update that as we go on our way. Let me just start that way. I was just talking to some of my colleagues here. Apologize for the fact that I've been running around out in this rain, and that's why I look all sopping wet. So sorry about that. But in any event, so again, my name is Jack Lloyd, and we're here to talk about the CARES Act and how that CARES Act, you've probably heard about on the news or had friends or family talk to you about, impacts you. So first of all, what is the CARES Act? So what I thought we'd do, what I have found effective in the past, is to go ahead and just read through the CARES Act, taking out some of the, all the superfluous legalese, and then unpack the language that we did talk about to make sure that everyone is on board about what it says. And that seems to be the easiest way to do it. So let's just jump right in. I presume you're on this Facebook call today because you either have a mortgage or you have a family or friend who have a mortgage, and you have some questions about, wow, during the time of COVID, financial situations have changed rather drastically. And looking at the news, I don't know what the relief coming or isn't coming is going to look like. So how does that impact me? What do I do if I am financially impacted by this COVID business and I have a mortgage? What can I do? So that's what we're going to talk about. So the CARES Act. What is the CARES Act? It's the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Securities Act. Again, the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Securities Act. You don't have to know that. It's the CARES Act. That's where it comes from. They always legislators have a way of trying to create language so that the letters look cute and fun, and the government cares about you. That's what they're saying. But we're going to dig in and see what it really says. Okay, the CARES Act. The term COVID-19 emergency means the national emergency related to the coronavirus that was declared a national emergency by the president on March 13th. So that's what the coronavirus emergency is. Once the president declared it a national emergency on March 13th, that's the period of time from that point forward that we're talking about. And that's going to have some important consequences for you and some of the decisions you make based on some timelines we're going to talk about. So it was March 13th moving forward. And what the CARES Act says here is, I can read it to you directly. You have two big options for how you can deal with the coronavirus, the impact of coronavirus on your financial situation related to your mortgage. And the first one we're gonna talk about is what's called the moratorium. I'm gonna just read it to you. The foreclosure moratorium. Except with respect to a vacant or abandoned property, a servicer of a federally backed mortgage may not initiate any judicial or non-judicial foreclosure process, move for a foreclosure judgment, order a sale, or execute a foreclosure-related eviction or foreclosure sale not less than a 60-day period beginning on March 18th. Okay, what does that say? What that says is that if you have a federally backed mortgage, there is a moratorium on anyone moving forward with anything related to a foreclosure and your mortgage, anything related to the foreclosure. They may not notice a foreclosure hearing. They may not proceed with a foreclosure hearing, even if they noticed it before this started. They might not move forward with the foreclosure sale of your home, even if they had already gotten the order when this took place. And even if they had noticed the hearing, had the hearing, gone through with the sale, they may not move for a foreclosure related eviction during this period of time. So basically, it is a big pause button that is hit on anyone with, we're going to talk about who has a federally backed mortgage in a moment, how to figure that out. But basically, first and foremost, right out of the gate, what the CARES Act says is if you've got a federally backed mortgage, no one can do anything related to proceeding with a foreclosure against you, no matter what stage that foreclosure process may have been at when this started. Now, you heard me saying for not less than a 60-day period beginning on March 18th. Now you're thinking, okay, March 18th, wow, we're past that. It's April, May, and now it's August 3rd. One of the things that we're here to talk about are some updates. And one of the biggest updates we have to report is that a week ago, at the end of July, that moratorium extension has been extended until August 31st. August 31st for all federally backed loans. And we're going to talk about those in a minute. So this moratorium, if you have a federally backed loan, is applicable until August 31st. And if you do have a federally backed loan and anyone attempts to do anything related to your property or your mortgage and a foreclosure, you should seek legal counsel immediately, because they are almost certainly proceeding illicitly and they can be stopped. Okay. That's step one, the flat moratorium. So step one of the CARES Act is if people have a federally backed loan, nothing moves forward at this point. Good. Again, we'll talk about how you determine whether or not you have a federally backed loan or not in a moment. Let's stick with the language of the statute itself. Step two, okay? This is called a forbearance. Forbearance. Forbearance, it's just a technical term, which means legally someone stops from proceeding for typically what's considered a legal right. So someone has a legal right to proceed about something and they do not, that is a forbearance, okay? And in this case, that would be if someone were to default on their mortgage payment, a mortgage holder has the right to proceed with a foreclosure, right? Well, in this case, this is them stopping from proceeding with that right against a mortgage or homeowner, mortgage holder. Now, let's look at this language. Forbearance. During the covered period, we'll define that in a minute, a borrower with a federally backed loan experiencing a financial hardship due directly or indirectly to the COVID emergency may request a forbearance regardless of their delinquency status on their mortgage by submit, and don't worry, we're going to go back over this language slowly in a minute, by submitting a request to your mortgage servicer and by affirming to your mortgage servicer that you have a financial hardship related to COVID. What happens if you do that? You have a federally backed loan. You go to your servicer and you say, I want a forbearance. What does the servicer have to do? Servicer, upon the request of the homeowner, shall grant the homeowner, that's the mortgage servicer, shall grant you for up to 180 days a forbearance on your mortgage payments. And they shall extend an additional 180 days upon the request of the homeowner. 180, you get two back-to-back 180 periods of time. 360 days, basically a year. Now, no fees or penalties or interest beyond what is already scheduled in your mortgage payments shall accrue against the homeowner. And when the homeowner makes the request, the mortgage servicer shall not request additional documentation other than the borrower's attestation. That means if the homeowner says it, that's all that is necessary under the law. The mortgage servicer shall provide a forbearance of up to 180 days, which may be extended for an additional period of 180 days at the request of the homeowner, provided that the borrower's request for the extension be made during the covered period and that the borrower's request is initiated or extends and may be initiated or extended or shortened by the homeowner. That means all the options for whether or not you want to stay in the forbearance or continue with the forbearance are up to you. And you may shorten it if you opt for it. So if you opt for it, you're not stuck with it. That's going to become important, as we'll see in a moment. All right, let's talk about some of this language very specifically. That was the 40,000-foot view. Now let's dig down here and see what this really means. Okay. Again, let's do the overarching. This CARES Act for the federal government has two major prongs, two major parts. The first is a moratorium. That moratorium says if you have a federally backed loan, or if a homeowner has a federally backed loan, no one is to proceed with any aspect of foreclosure against that homeowner. Until right now, it's until August 31st. That may be extended, it may not be extended, we don't know. So far, it's been extended, as you can see, a couple times since it started as 60 days from March. So they've obviously extended it. They may continue to extend it. We don't know. Who knows what the folks in Washington are going to do, right? So let's not worry about what they're going to do. Let's worry about what we know today. And what we know today is that at least until basically September 1st, until the end of August 31st, no one may initiate a foreclosure matter against you or continue a matter that was initiated before COVID started. So what Jack are you talking about with this federally backed thing? How do I know if well, that's a great question. What does federally backed mortgage mean? Well, just so you know, so 2/3 of the mortgages in the United States of America right now are federally backed loans. 1/3 of them are not. At the end of the talk here, we'll talk a little bit about maybe what some options are if you're not a federally backed mortgage. But the CARES Act, which is a federal act, has its application primarily to federally backed loans. That's why this pertains to federally backed mortgages. Okay. So what does a federally backed mortgage mean? It means a mortgage, reading from their definition here, which is purchased, securitized, owned, insured, or guaranteed by Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, the Federal Housing Administration, FHA, Veterans Affairs, VA, U.S. Department of Agricultural Rural Home Services. Now, that does take 2/3 of the mortgages in the United States. 2/3 of the mortgages. So chances are likelier than not, that you have a federally backed loan. Now, how do you know? How can you find out if you have a federally backed loan? Most people wouldn't know this off the top of their head, right? Well, it's not that hard to figure out, fortunately. There's an outfit called the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau, the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau. And they have a website, consumerfinance.gov, consumerfinance.gov. So it's the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau. It's part of the United States government. And they have a website, consumerfinance.gov. And when you go to their website, consumerfinance.gov, they have a whole COVID section. As you can imagine, so many people have questions about this. So they have a whole COVID section, and it's very user friendly. It's not built for lawyers; it's built for lay people. And they have some drop down menus, and they have a search bar, and they actually have a section that's called "How can I tell who owns my mortgage?" So they make it pretty easy. How can I tell who owns my mortgage? I will tell you on this that takes into account all the different kinds of federally backed loans. If you think you might have a Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac loan, they too have websites that are user friendly, that have access to information, so that you can go into their little website, go into their COVID section, and ask. You plug in some information right off of your mortgage, your last mortgage statement. And that's another place people often find it, right on your mortgage statement itself. So that statement that you may get either through email or in paper mail, your monthly mortgage statement, that will have the information related. Some do to whether or not it's a Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, FHA, Veterans Affairs, but if it doesn't, it's okay. You may go to consumerfinance.gov and plug some of that information, and you will find out. So as I said, 2/3 of mortgages are federally backed loans. Okay, so you go to the website, you go in there and you find out you go into the little COVID section, you go to the search bar, you look for how do I tell if I have a federally backed loan, and you plug in the information, you find out. Okay, so let's say you have a federally backed loan. You have a federally backed loan. I'm going to quiz you here. And before COVID started, someone had initiated the foreclosure process, and they even had a hearing, and they even got an order allowing a foreclosure sale. Can they proceed right now? They may not, because of the moratorium piece. May they file a notice of hearing right now? They may not. May they seek a foreclosure eviction? No, they can't do anything right now. But you say to yourself, but wait a minute, Jack, it is August 3rd. And what if these folks up in DC, I was going to use a pejorative. I'm not going to use a pejorative. Let's say that gang up there hasn't gotten their act together, and we get to the end of August and it hasn't been continued, and the relief, they still haven't figured this stuff out yet. Now what happens? The moratorium expires. So again, that's where we get to the forbearance piece. Forbearance. Your request as the borrower to have your payments restructured over 180 days with the option of an extension for another 180 days. How do you do that? Well, that mortgage statement that we were talking about a minute ago that you get either through the email or paper mail that has the information about your mortgage this month is due, this is the interest on it, all that good stuff that you love to read about your mortgage. It will have the name of the servicer on there. It came from the servicer. The servicer is the party who kind of keeps track of all that stuff. And that is the party that you initiate a conversation with. And that's very important. They're not going to do this for you. They're not going to do this for you. Under the CARES Act, as we were just reading a minute ago, the borrower, the homeowner, does have the obligation to go and seek this forbearance. The homeowner initiates the communication with the servicer. What are we going to say to the servicer? We have a COVID-related financial hardship. You say, wait a minute, Jack, I don't have COVID. You don't need to have COVID to get the benefits. It says directly or indirectly. I'm going to read that sentence again. Experiencing a financial hardship directly or indirectly related to COVID. What's indirectly mean? Well, it means I don't have COVID, but what if my boss, I work in the stockroom at a restaurant or a grocery store, my boss got sick or the manager got sick and the restaurant shut down. Well, I don't have COVID, but I was indirectly affected by COVID. As a matter of fact, if you think about it, folks, there's almost no one in America today who has not been indirectly financially impacted by COVID. I certainly have, and I don't have COVID, but certainly I don't know anyone who has not had some impact in their lives because of COVID, financial impact on their lives because of COVID, for whatever reason that may be. As I said, they don't need you to do that. And you don't need some kind of paperwork or documentation. The way this bill was written, here I'm going to give credit to those guys up in Washington and gals up in Washington. They structured the language so that you don't have to show up with a shoebox full of pieces of paper to show how you were financially affected. Your attestation, your statement that you were financially affected is all that is required under the law. That's all that's required under the law. So, but you, again, don't forget, you have to initiate this. You have to reach out to the servicer and say, I have been infected by COVID and I request a forbearance. I request a forbearance of 180 days and I'm keeping my option open. I might want that second 180 days. Okay. Hold on a second. You're thinking to yourself now. And wait, didn't this guy just read a second ago that the servicer shall grant the forbearance if it's requested and the borrower attests that, yes, he or she has been impacted financially, even indirectly by COVID? Then who wouldn't want to do this? Doesn't it seem like easy peasy? Okay, so here are some of the, not downsides necessarily, but here are the things that are very important to remember about this whole forbearance thing. So remember, moratorium step 1, that's probably going to end at the end of August, maybe. You don't have to wait, I should say that. You don't have to wait, by the way, until August 31st. Even though the moratorium's on, that doesn't stop you from reaching out and making this request to your servicer now. You may do this right now. You may do this right now. You reach out to your servicer, you initiate, I've been affected by COVID. I would like to request 100 forbearance on my payments for my mortgage. Here's the thing you gotta know. This is not a grant money. This is not not getting free money with this. This does not mean, oh, I get 180 days of not paying my mortgage. This is fantastic. And that money, those payments are being made, say, by the government, or those are just going to go away. The problem with this package, with this second prong of this CARES package, it's not a problem. But the thing you have to keep in mind is you're still going to owe that money, and you're going to owe them the interest on that money that was set to accrue during that period of time. They're not going to give you late penalties or anything like that. You get the forbearance, but you're still going to owe that money. So how does that work? How does this forbearance thing work? I take my 180 days, and I want to I can't make the payment right now, so I want the 180 days. What at the end of 180 days? Well, let's take a look at an example. Here's a classic example that we often talk a lot about with our clients before they make the decision if they want to do the forbearance or not. Well, let's say that you reduce your monthly mortgage payment. Let's say it was $1,000, and you reduce that. Let's say you don't pick the full 180 days. Let's say you request a forbearance from your servicer, and by the way, you may ask for it again. That's the great thing about how this was written. If you ask for 180 days, you don't have to stay in it that whole time. Because if you start getting paid again, if you're fortunate enough to get employment again or increase in income during that period of time, you may not want to keep accruing the money over time, because watch how this will play out. Let's say the amount of the reduction of $1,000 mortgage payment gets spread out over 12 months. And then you do, you take a couple months off. What happens when you start making your mortgage payments again? How is this going to be paid out? Well, your mortgage payment might have been $1,000, but over the course of 3 months that you took your forbearance, you've built up $1,500 over here. Now, how's that going to be paid back? Well, there are a couple of different models. That's what we're going to talk about. Some of those models say you might have to pay that back at the end of the forbearance period. The whole lump sum, probably not. Under most of the models, not so. One or two are out there that are uncertain, but probably not that. What about an increased payment? So my mortgage payment was $1,000 a month. I took 3 months off. I took 6 months off. I took 10 months off my payment. That money is still owed, still sitting here. Now what's going to happen? Well, now my mortgage payments might go up because the amount of money I owe each month is still the $1,000 a month. But now it's $1,000 plus a piece of the 10 months that have been hanging outside. Some of the models say, well, what about all of that that accumulated during the period that I was in forbearance, and let's put it at the end of my mortgage. So my mortgage was supposed to come due, say in 2025, it ended. Well, maybe we just extend it to 2028. Okay, maybe. The way in which you have to pay back the forbearance depends upon which one of the federally backed loans you have. Freddie, Fannie, VA, FHA, rural housing, VA. So you see what I'm saying? What happens is when you go to the servicer to request a forbearance, what you need to do, what is essential for you to do, is to find out what the payback model for your loan looks like, because they are not all the same. And some folks might have a payback model that is really attractive to use, and another model that does not. So say you have a VA, you like the Fannie Mae payback model, but you don't like the VA. Well, you're going to be stuck with the type of loan that you have, and your servicer is going to explain all this to you. I'm skipping some material here. I see we don't want to go too long here, but I'm just trying to make sure you all have the highlights here. What you need to do, just to kind of clarify that point, you're thinking about a forbearance. You're thinking about a forbearance. The moratorium ends. You are still impacted financially by COVID. You don't love the idea of building up a bunch of money that you're going to owe later on, but you also don't have the money right now, or you want to use it in that way because of other life crises during the pandemic. So call your servicer. That's what we recommend you do. You call your servicer and start this discussion. And one of the most important things you have to find out just for yourself is, what does the payback model look like? Because getting a forbearance is great, but if the model for paying it back would sink you 6 months or 10 months or 24 months from now, that's something you have a right to know. So what are the options? You call these folks, you call the servicer. What are the options for forbearance available to you for this payback? And you want to go through that very carefully and see whether or not a forbearance is right for you. And some folks might not have an option. They don't have any option other than a forbearance right now, because the COVID impact in their lives has shut down the restaurant that they worked at or wherever. Some of this stuff can get tricky. And you may be saying to yourself, this is a lot to do. This is a lot for me to figure out what I need to ask this servicer, run these calculations with my income, try and figure out what my potential income might be. Is there anyone else? Is there anyone out there to help me? And the answer is yes. At the same consumer.gov website that we talked about a few minutes ago, where you can go and find out whether or not you have a federally backed mortgage, they have another easy to follow drop-down menu where you or a little link that you can click, I should say, and it's consumerfinance.gov, finding a housing counselor. Finding a housing counselor, and that's a HUD, Housing Urban Development approved counselor. This is someone who has gone through training to be approved by HUD, by the Housing and Urban Development Department, to be able to do this job. To do what job? To shepherd you through some of these choices and some of these options. So consumerfinance.gov, that's the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau. At that website, go into the COVID area and you can find out who owns my mortgage, right? Is this a federally backed mortgage? You can also find out, how do I find a housing counselor? And by the way, they'll help you then locally, right? Like, even though this is a big federal government website out of DC, it will find you a housing counselor there in your community, or as close to your community as a HUD approved counselor is. Because these are not easy decisions, and this is difficult material. I want to say this is important. You don't want to wait for the moratorium. You don't want to figure all, you want to sit around waiting for those folks in DC to figure out whether or not they're going to extend the moratorium or what they're going to do. And you decide, based on my life circumstances today, I think a forbearance would be helpful. It would be helpful to know that for 180 days, I got some breathing room to figure out how to handle life financially in this crazy pandemic time. And it gives me the option of extending that for an additional 180 days if I want it. I know I don't know that how I'm gonna, what we're gonna do on the payback piece, but I know I need it. Okay, fine. But we recommend this. If you go with the forbearance, during the period of forbearance, don't let your eye off the ball. Those mortgage statements are still gonna come. They're still required to send you those mortgage statements. Keep your eye on them. Make sure they're doing the accounting right. Not trying to be cynical here, but one of the things that's important is, if you get the forbearance during the period of forbearance, think about that. Let's say you did 180, that could be 12 mortgage statements. During that period of time, make sure that they have not made errors on your mortgage statement by saying hadn't paid, or otherwise putting you in some kind of a default situation, or saying that they're going to add on late fees or anything like that. Just keep your eye on that mortgage statement each month. And also, you might want to keep your eye on credit, on your credit score. I'm not saying, you're checking this every hour or anything, but when people aren't making a typical mortgage payment and they have been, what could happen is that could be interpreted by one of these organizations as a failure to make a mortgage payment, which could impact your credit. You don't make a mortgage payment, that hurts your credit, right? The reality of it is, there's supposed to be safeguards in this system that prevent that from happening. But we all know during this crazy time, I'm not trusting any of that shenanigans, right? Watch your mortgage statement. So to recap, let's make sure we have this right. So the CARES Act has two big pieces of it. One stops everything. If you have a federally backed loan, they shouldn't be doing anything with your mortgage since March until the end of this month. And if they have, you need to seek legal counsel, because they shouldn't have. 2, you may do this now, you may wait and do this, but you may seek a forbearance on your payments. If it is right for you and you feel like the payback model that your servicer is going to offer you to pay back the forbearance is something you want to enter into, or need to enter into, frankly, as many folks are right now under that circumstance, then you go through the process of calling your servicer, telling them, I am impacted by COVID financial hardship. You don't have to send in paperwork. And if they dance around and don't listen to you or demand that you do send in paperwork, or say you can't have the 180 days, seek legal counsel. Again, they're doing something they're not supposed to do. You have this right. The CARES Act has provided you this right. And for a lot of folks, this is a great opportunity. And for people who this works for, we highly recommend that you consider taking advantage of it. And this is the last thing I'll say. Why? Why consider it right now? Maybe I don't need it this second. Well, maybe you don't need it this second. But don't forget the language in the CARES Act. This is applicable to people who make a forbearance request during the COVID emergency. Okay. Well, Jack, I looked at the news. Dr. Mandy Cohen is saying, you know, all these cases are still going on. Obviously, we're still in an emergency. Now, that's not the definition. The definition of whether or not we're still in the COVID emergency is whether or not that federal emergency directive that was initiated on May 18th has been renewed or not. And if they decide for whatever reason we don't have an emergency anymore, it may cut off your rights to be able to request a forbearance. Will it happen? I don't know, but I sure as heck don't want my rights infringed upon by the willy-nilly ways in which Washington works, right? These are your rights, and we want you to take advantage of the rights that you have. So the thing on the forbearance is, look at the payback model structure and then make a decision. And we don't know when that decision may be terminated. So it's something that you should consider. If you need help with that, consumerfinance.gov, housing counselor request, housing counselor near me, and someone will be able to help you with that. And with that, I believe there is no question. So thank you very much for taking the time to tune in. And if at any point, whether you are feeling as though someone is doing something when the moratorium is on and they shouldn't be, or if anyone questions your request to take advantage of your right to seek the forbearance, please seek legal counsel. Please seek legal counsel. But that's all we have today. I hope that was helpful, and look forward to updating y'all sometime in the future. Thank you very much.